On today's video, I want to continue the deep dive on Space Marine lore as we get into some of the theories that I have bouncing around in my head of what a Space Marine can be. Now, before I ask you to become a heretic and suspend your belief on what a Space Marine is and isn't, I want to remind you that Games Workshop does a really good job of making the lore very sandboxy and moldable. So some of these theories are very plausible, and the best way to understand that is to understand a faction within the Space Marines that is neither loyalist nor traitor or chaos. It's called a renegade space marine. Not all heretical Astartes can trace back their history to the Horus Heresy. Over the 10,000 Terran years, many more space marines have fallen from the Emperor's light. Driven by bitterness, greed, or lust for power, these traitors now fight against the Imperium they once served. Despite years of psycho-indoctrination, hypno-conditioning, arduous training, incredible mental robustness, and strength of character, not even Space Marines of the Adeptus Astartes are completely immune to the human weakness. They too have fallen to the subtle temptations of chaos. Though the Administratum would never openly admit to such a thing, over the course of its long history, individual Space Marines, squads, and even entire chapters have turned renegade in an alarming number. There are many reasons for this heretical phenomenon, with each new band of renegade evidencing their own weaknesses or buried desires. Some are simply power-hungry and chafe against the shackles placed upon them by the Imperium's labyrinthian rules and bureaucracies. Others grow disillusioned, holding too tightly to a sense of enlightenment and looking with scorn upon the human cattle they are told it is their purpose to protect. Some are exiled and dishonored, cast aside in the wake of tragedy, heresy, or rampant politicking. These Space Marines may even be preemptively attacked, driving the survivors into a life of piracy as they are forced to flee the Imperium that betrayed them. All renegades are reavers of some kind, raiding, pillaging, and murdering in their constant battle to survive, secure new territories, and defend their strongholds. On those rare, devastating occasions where a whole chapter turns traitor, entire systems can swiftly collapse. They are assailed by the deadliest warriors in the galaxy in full strength and without restraint. Such merciless assaults leave worlds stripped of material, their populations enslaved or massacred, and vast fortifications erected on their surfaces to either honor the Dark Gods or the Space Marines themselves. Many renegades dwell in the Eye of Terror, following in the footsteps of the traitor legions before them. Many more operate from hidden bases on asteroid fields, from vast space hulks that drift through the void without cores, or as nomads aboard fleets or single ships. No matter what caused them to turn, all Space Marine renegades eventually fall to chaos, by accident or some design. Free from the bounds of Imperial doctrine, some indulge their desire for the sake of glory and greed. Others, close to extinction or on the brink of catastrophic defeat, hand their souls over to the Dark Gods in exchange for the smallest chance of survival. The Crimson Slaughter, the Purge, the Red Corsairs, the Cleaved, the Scourged, and many more are renegade warbands whose names strike fear into the hearts of the Imperial rulers. For the Inquisition and the Imperium's High Command, they are a stark reminder of the innate risks that all Space Marines pose, and how humanity's greatest asset can swiftly become its greatest danger. Despite obvious needs for the Adeptus Astartes to defend the Imperium, they too are susceptible to heresy, and should be closely observed without complacency. The mere existence of such renegade warbands stirs deep hatred within the loyalist Adeptus Astartes. Not only do they despise their traitor brethren for their heretical crimes, but also for the fact that they dishonor all that it means to be a Space Marine, casting doubt upon the loyalists of those who remain true. Wars between loyalists and renegade Space Marines escalate rapidly, enveloping entire subsectors in terrible, all-consuming conflict. Many renegades relish these wars for the opportunity to harvest gene seed and equipment. After all, they combine the material might of the Adeptus Astartes with the dark and unnatural blessings of the Chaos Gods. Renegade warbands rarely boast any but the most rudimentary supply chain. Most are forced to survive by cannibalizing the war gear and even biological components of loyalist warriors, or else by preying upon less powerful renegade bands. No one, except perhaps the Emperor, knows just how many Space Marines have turned renegade over the millennium. Even one loyal warrior falling in this fashion is too many, as each new renegade warband joins the long war on the side of the Dark Gods, so they take with them yet more of the Imperium's military might, now turned to the perverse purposes of tearing down humanity's realm, one world at a time. In the chaos that has ravaged across the Imperium since the Great Rift's emergence, raids of such nature have become frighteningly common. Renegade sees every opportunity to capitalize upon the confusion, the hardships and panic of isolated Imperial forces and worlds. The Imperium's armies are overstretched and overwhelmed on multiple fronts, making too many worlds easy prey for the Chaos Renegades, who are well learned in the art of plundering, reaving, and raiding. So now that we have an understanding of the true core Renegade Space Marine, let's jump into these super heretical theories as to what a Space Marine can end up being like. The first one is, what if a Space Marine was combined with Necrons? The first thing that pops into my mind when I think of this awesome combination is, does it already exist? And the answer is not really, but kind of. You see, like most of the Imperium, Space Marine chapters are disgusted by xenotechnology. They have an extreme animosity towards anything that is not human tech, and obviously Necron technology is no exception. However, this hatred is steeped in the antiquated traditions forced onto most Space Marine chapters by factions like the Adeptus Mechanicus, which has a big influence on every single chapter, the Inquisition, which has kept a watchful eye on the autonomy of these Angels of Death, and the Ecclesiarchy, or the Imperial Church, which has manipulated their way into the culture of many of these Space Marine chapters. And although these influences have plagued the Space Marines for almost a full 10,000 years since the Great Crusade, there is one faction that does not shy away from using Xeno weapons and war gear, the Death Watch. Now, it's difficult to call the Death Watch a Space Marine chapter, as it's made up of a conglomeration of battle brothers from different chapters who are tasked with standing vigil over their domain, but these warriors are ubiquitous for wielding strange Xeno weapons into battle. So there is some form of precedence of Space Marines using Necron technology to fight for the Imperium. And there are two reasons why this is important. The first is that it proves that Space Marines are capable of physically using Necron technology. They might not understand the full capacity of this alien tech, but have the means to manipulate it to use it in their favor, a crucial step in establishing our Necron Space Marines. It also shows that they don't shy away from using xenotech, if not at least ignoring the established stigma or playing dumb. The second is that despite the disapproval of all of the other Imperial factions, the Death Watch is able to get away with using alien technology, meaning that a Necron Space Marine army would have to be tolerated if their duty or their charge was just as important as the Death Watch. Now we have to ask the question, why would a Battle Brother undergo hybridization with Necron technology? And the answer to that lies in the ideologies of one of the most famous Space Marine chapters, the Iron Hands. You see, the Iron Hands hold on to the belief that the flesh is weak. They view the improvements of the organic with the mechanical as something that should be sought after. They still respect the physical form and view their bodies as a blessing bestowed onto them by the Emperor of Mankind, but bionics are a way to enhance the godlike abilities of all Battle Brothers. And through these improvements, a Battle Brother is seen as becoming a stronger warrior because of the advantages provided by the machine. And there is no technology in the 40K universe more advanced than that of the Necrons. And so what if a successor chapter of the Iron Hands takes it upon themselves to improve their bodies not just with standard Imperial bionics, but Necron tech, using the materials found on their homeworld, which could have been an ancient Necron tomb world, whose reanimation protocols failed to kick in, and the Tech Marines of that chapter salvaged the Necron technology and incorporated it into each member of their chapter. Not only would that be an awesome origin story to this chapter, but it could open up a narrative storyline that the chapter must seek out and conquer new tomb worlds in order to maintain a steady source of tech for each generation of Battle Brothers. This Necron Space Marine chapter would in fact be Necron Grave Robbers. Now the question becomes, what type of enhancements would these Astarte warriors get if they incorporated Necron tech? Because let's be honest, we don't just want Battle Brothers that use Necron weapons, we want a complete fusion of the two factions. And the first obvious upgrade would be living metal armor. Not only would it make the already impervious Space Marines almost indestructible, but by using necrodermis on the bodies of Space Marines, their metal parts would be able to self-repair. And what's awesome about this concept is that the Primarch Ferrus Manus is rumored to have necrodermis arms, showing a connection between this successor chapter and their gene father. Now, incorporation of Necron technology would also mean the use of Noctilith, or Black Stone. This material is what made up the Necron pylons on Cadia and what is being heavily researched by the Adeptus Mechanicus in the current era. A Space Marine chapter with access to Black Stone would more than likely use it to defend itself against the powers of chaos, meaning that not only would a Necron Space Marine army be a major threat to other Tomb Worlds, but they would have a serious advantage over the armies of the Chaos Gods. This would make our homebrew chapter one of the most effective fighting forces in the Imperium against Xenos. Now, there could be some drawbacks to using Necron technology, as the new Necrodermis parts might alter the mindsets of individual battle brothers, taking away part of their free will and succumbing to some form of the command protocol. But this potential danger would just create an interesting backstory. For example, these Necron Space Marines must constantly be watched over by a tech priest to make sure that the ancient command protocols of the nanoscarabs that make up their bodies don't take over their minds. And just like the Wolfen Curse or the Black Rage, once a battle brother is taken over by the machine, his body must be destroyed so that his soul may return to the Emperor. In appearance, these Necron Space Marines would look more like battle automatons of the Adeptus Mechanicus than true Astarte warriors, but I don't see them changing too much of the human form given to them by the Emperor of Mankind. So, as badass as it would be to see Space Marine Wraith hybrids, I think most battle brothers would simply appear heavily modified with bionics rather than canoptic constructs. Their fortress monastery would more than likely be a stolen tomb world where the chapter master would sit and commune with his council in a chamber that once belonged to an ancient Necron overlord whose throne is now adorned with an imperial aquila. So now that we have a base understanding on what a Necron Space Marine can look like, let's dive deeper into the heresy and talk about a Space Marine Tau.
The Tau Empire is seen as an enemy of the Imperium of Man since their rapidly advancing culture was rediscovered on the eastern fringe of the Milky Way galaxy. Exactly when the Tau Empire and the Imperium of Man made first contact with one another is unknown, for each was slow to recognize the nature of the other. For the Tau's part, it was fringe, dissent, or overtly renegade elements of humanity that they first encountered, in the form of free captains and pirates, across the coreward borders of the region called the Damocles Gulf, in the eastern fringe to the galactic east of Terra. The initial contacts ranged from friendly negotiations and trade to outright hostility. It was some time before the Tau Watercast diplomats understood the fact that the humans they had encountered were merely the forgotten outcasts of an incomprehensibly vast interstellar empire that stretched across the entirety of the Milky Way galaxy. This empire was so vast that any overt aggression on the Tau's part might lead to the outright destruction of their new empire and the existence of their species. Though many of the more passionate leaders of the Tau Firecast called for a war of conquest against the Imperium, the Ethereals issued their instructions for the integration of the Imperium of Man into the Tau Empire. The Watercasts were to ally themselves with nearby dissident human factions, and over the course of several decades of patient negotiations, insinuate themselves into the courts of several dozen Imperial commanders. The influence of the Tau thus spread further and more rapidly into the Imperium than any amount of military conquest could have taken it, until a swath of human worlds were trading with the Tau Empire, in preference to the Imperium's own merchant trade cartels and rogue traders. Alien goods and technology flowed through the markets of these border worlds in plain contradiction of the laws of the Imperium. The second phase of the Ethereal's instructions were thus ready to be initiated. Upon a score of worlds, Watercast envoys whispered long-rehearsed words into willing ears. The seeds of rebellion had long been cultivated by the Tau, and now bore traitorous fruits, as each Imperial governor declared himself free of the shackles of the Imperium's rule. In the ensuing power vacuum, the Tau Empire expanded, claiming for themselves those human worlds that came to be known as the Farside Enclaves. The Imperium's response was unusually swift, but characteristically brutal. War was declared, and the Damocles Gulf Crusade was launched by the Ultima Segmentum Command, involving units of the Imperial Guard, the Imperial Navy, and several chapters of the Space Marines. But what if the Imperium would have never declared war on the Tau Empire? What if instead a new agreement between Terra and the Farside Enclaves were signed? An agreement that would allow the Imperial worlds to benefit from trade with the Tau, so long as the Tau Empire gave the worlds back and stop their attempt to take control of Imperial worlds. As heretical as this may seem, the two empires would have benefited greatly from a treaty like this, because in the coming years, a new and much larger threat emerged in this part of space: Hive Fleet Gorgon. The Gorgon was a splinter fleet of the Hive Fleet Behemoth that had been found by those Tyranids who had survived the Behemoth's destruction during the Battle of Macragge, and which began consuming poorly defended Imperial worlds to replenish its small numbers. By the time this splinter fleet made its way into the Tau space in the eastern fringe of the galaxy, it had grown to become a full Hive fleet in its own right. With the emergence of the Tyranids, the Imperium of Man and the Tau Empire would have been smart to form a pact of alliance. The Imperium would defend and trade with the Tau, and the Tau would fight and trade with the Imperium. This pact could have saved hundreds of planets from the Tyranid invasion, and even though it might seem as if an alliance would benefit the Tau more than the Imperium, the truth is, the Imperium of Man could see big benefits from the Tau Empire. The Tau Empire's caste system specializes its population to become masters of one trade. Tau diplomats could negotiate deals with neighboring planets on behalf of the Imperial Tau Alliance. Earth caste engineers could work alongside the Adeptus Mechanicus to demonstrate technology pioneered by the Tau Empire, such as plasma generators. The technologically savvy Tau Empire could lead the AdMech to further understanding of the Omnissiah and his place within the technology. But most importantly, the Tau Fire Warrior caste would prove to be the most beneficial part of a Tau Imperial alliance. The Tau are unique amongst the Xeno species of the galaxy, in that they possess no psychers, nor do they succumb to the chaotic taint like an Imperial guardsman. Tau Fire Warriors would be the perfect auxiliary in an ever-growing battle against the forces of chaos. While they do not possess the pariah gene, nor are they able to nullify the warp, the Tau Fire Warrior can enter a war zone and fight the demons of chaos without fear of coming out of the battles contaminated. At first, the Imperium of Man would use the Tau Fire Warriors as a complement to the Imperial Guard, but after seeing the Fire Warriors' inability to fight wars of attrition, they would shift their military force into a special operation force. Tau's tendency towards diplomacy and trade would allow the Fire Warriors to be purchased as mercenaries. It would be to the Tau's advantage to allow their fire caste to fight in the name of the Imperium in order to keep the Imperium from fighting the Tau. At the same time, the Tau Fire Warriors would be gathering intel on the strategies of the Imperium of Man. The mercenary Fire Warrior would build on to the stockpile of reconnaissance the Tau would need in future conflicts. The tech priest and magobiologist of the Adeptus Mechanicus could not resist dissecting and enhancing the biology of the Tau Fire Warriors, and it would be in the best interest of the Tau Ethereal caste to allow this to occur. Augmentation to the Tau physiology would lead the Tau to better understanding the medical processes of the Imperium. Their goal would be to understand their genetic manipulation abilities. The endgame would be the creation of Tau Space Marines. The gene seed of a Space Marine can never be used to enhance a Tau Fire Warrior. The gene seed would simply not match any of the Tau's natural physiologies. What the Tau would have to do is understand how the gene seed was manipulated and how it can be replicated to fit the Tau Fire Warrior's genome. Because the gene seed of a Space Marine comes from his Primarch, and that Primarch's gene seed comes from the God Emperor himself, the Tau Empire would have to face the fact that their Tau Space Marines would never be a true Space Marine, but the skills and abilities of an Astartes would be replicated and enhanced. Once the Earth caste discovered the genetic manipulation power of the Imperium, it would begin to augment and enhance their Fire Warrior caste, a secret project that would begin on the Tau's homeworld that would see the birth of the Tau Space Marines. These new Fire Warriors would have multiple organs that would manipulate and enhance the Tau's natural respiratory and nervous system, allowing them to perform great feats of endurance better than a Space Marine. They would contain augmentations to the unique Tau gland that would improve the warrior's endocrine system, creating massive Tau Fire Warriors. They would be larger and stronger than the Fire Warriors of the past, and stronger than even a Space Marine. Augmentation to the Tau's immune system would create fire warriors, impervious to disease and illness. Their ability to heal from wounds that would normally kill a normal warrior would make them appear indestructible. Like the Space Marines of the Imperium, they would no longer need sleep like a normal Tau. Their bodies would be able to shut off sections of their brain and remain alert enough to continue fighting. The Tau's natural connection to the ethereal caste would be enhanced, to the point where a Tau Space Marine would be able to intrinsically coordinate attacks without having to stay in constant communication with the ethereal commander. Hormonal signals would direct each Tau Space Marine, allowing each member of the team to know whom to attack and how best to battle a foe. This new enhancement would seem to be derived from some telepathic power, but in reality, it would be similar to the way ants on Terra communicate with each other. They send pheromonal markers that direct the whole colony. Tau Space Marine vision would improve to the point where sights would be irrelevant to a fire warrior. Their superior eyesight, coupled with Tau technology like target lock, would make the new Tau warrior the deadliest marksmen in the galaxy. The last and one of the most important of the gene seed organ implants a Tau Space Marine would possess is the Black Hoof. A neuroactive black organic fibrous material is implanted directly on top of the Tau Fire Warrior's hooves, which would connect to the Tau's central nervous system. The black hooves would be as strong as Space Marine adamantium, incapable of feeding back information to the Tau's brain about the environment. In addition, the hooves would be able to decipher the biological makeup of anything they step on. Tau Space Marine would become notorious for stomping the heads of their enemies, because by doing so, the Tau Marine absorbs the enemy's knowledge.
A Tau Space Marine is very plausible in my mind. Another theory that I have that I get a lot of questions about is, can a Space Marine have a child? In other words, an entire family brought from the bloodline of a Space Marine. And I think the answer is yes.
The average Space Marine will not and technically can't have a family. They are the Emperor's greatest warriors, and their purpose in life is to kill the enemies of mankind, not to tend to the average experiences of a normal human. But that doesn't mean it's impossible to create a scenario where an extended or even immediate family exists within the life of an Adeptus Astartes warrior. In order to do this and still stay within the boundaries of the Space Marine lore, we must first understand what the life of a Space Marine looks like. The Battle Brothers of the Adeptus Astartes are not born, they are created. Every Space Marine starts out as a simple human child, usually living amongst the feral tribes on a recruitment world. Throughout their entire lives, they will be tested by the harsh environments of their planets, and those that do not shy away from violence and possess significant martial skills will usually get the attention of the chapter's chaplains. Through some brutal and deadly trials, the chaplains will test their human stock and choose the most worthy adolescent to begin the process of becoming a Space Marine. For most chapters, the average age of a neophyte will start at about 10 to 14 years old. The younger the boy is, the more adaptable his body will be to the gene seed organs that will be implanted throughout his initiation, a process that usually takes about 8 years and turns him into a Space Marine. This will be a painfully grueling time for the child, as his body, mind, and spirit is put to the test. The chapter's librarians will probe the neophyte's mind, while the apothecaries implement chemical treatments to integrate the gene seed organs into his body. All the while, he will go through psychological conditioning and subconscious hypnotherapy. This extreme training will wipe out the child that once existed. Most Space Marines won't even remember their old names, let alone the experiences of their past life. It is also important to note that while the implantation protocol won't remove the recruit's sex organs, the process will make the future Space Marines sterile. The majority of neophytes will not pass the procedure. The lucky ones will die, while the others will become chapter serfs, or lobotomized and turned into servitors for the chapter. For those that make it through the process, the end result is a superhuman warrior, untouched by disease, superior to the average man in every standard. Demigods that ride the waves of the galaxy as angels of death, defending mankind and purging the worlds of the Imperium from the Xeno, the mutant, and the damned. For the rest of their lives, they will not bother themselves with the petty emotions of humanity. In fact, most Space Marines will look down at what they once were. They will not hesitate to kill off entire populations if it means an imperial victory. Ruthless as they are indomitable, they will continue to fulfill their duty until their death. And even in death, some battle brothers will continue to serve as dreadnoughts. Now that we have an overview of a Space Marine's life, understanding why sustaining a family is a senseless pursuit for a battle brother, but there have been rare instances when a Space Marine chapter adopts unexpected practices that open up the possibility for a family. The first abnormality comes from the chapters that actually care about humanity, whether it is an ideology that is carried over from the teachings of their Primarch, or they slowly develop a bond with the human populations they protect. These Space Marines see humanity not as weak and pathetic creatures, but as a flock that the Emperor of Mankind tasked them to protect. They value the imperfections of mankind, and understand it is their duty to see humanity prosper. The Salamanders is one of these notoriously caring chapters. There are also those Space Marine chapters that ignore the hands-off approach of governing the planets that are under their protection, and instead take an active role in the bureaucratic procedures of their worlds. Usually high-ranking battle brothers act not only as commanders of their chapter, but also take on the titles of planetary governors. They have open communication with the people of their worlds, and develop relationships with the heads of the important households. They even attend social gatherings, and act with basic human formalities to connect with these people. And if they adopt these prescribed roles to seem more bureaucratic, then it is safe to say that some Space Marines might even take on a wife as an act of formality, much like politicians of today's time present themselves as proper husbands and fathers. The White Consuls is one of these chapters that has a direct link to their charges, going so far to create two chapter masters, one that can handle the prosecutions of war, and the other to properly govern its people. In these situations, the people of the planet idolize the Astartes and view them as we would view celebrities. There are also those Space Marine chapters that do not fully erase the memories of their recruits, and instead allow the family and tribal bonds of their past to remain even after they have become full-fledged battle brothers. The Sons of Dorn chapter go so far as to recruit from the same family line, and permit those households to track their sons' achievements. When battle brothers return to their ancestral homes, they are greeted with parades and celebrations. They have the rare opportunity to interact with their siblings, parents, and extended family. This also allows biological relatives to become Space Marines within the same chapter. While this is technically the Battle Brothers family, there is also another way a Space Marine can have a wife and kids. Some chapters prefer to recruit from a much older stock. While it is more likely that the neophyte's body will reject the gene seed organs and cause a greater number of painful deaths amongst the recruits, it does allow a future Space Marine to start a family before they begin their transformation process, and once they become full-fledged battle brothers, they have a child and a spouse waiting for them in the other end. By raising the age of a neophyte and allowing a Space Marine to have a wife and kids, it opens up the creative possibilities to write unique scenarios that the average battle brother just wouldn't have. For example, if the chaplains are scouting for teenage fathers, they can create trials that test the young father's ability to protect his family. Perhaps the aspirant must track down the whereabouts of a missing child, or rescue the entire family from a Xeno raider. An unarmed Space Marine may even challenge a neophyte to a trial by combat for the life of his wife, or a chaplain watches as a young warrior defends his ancestral home from invading human tribes. If the neophyte can protect his family, he will be rescued by the chaplain. The tone of the trial can also be way more grimdark, and part of the ritual for the neophyte is to murder his wife or kids as a representation that he is willing to cast aside all familial ties in order to serve the Sky Warriors. Another challenge created by this scenario that can spark creative stories is the fact that a Space Marine lives a lot longer than a simple human. An Astarte would have to see his family grow old and eventually die before they even see signs of aging. A Space Marine's father may return to his home planet to visit his elderly son and sit down to have his last meal before his child dies. It's easy to imagine an Astarte bringing back trophies of war to decorate his ancestral home, and by painting this bond between the Astarte and his family, it gives the Space Marine purpose outside of simply being warriors of the Emperor. Perhaps the chapter's tradition is to turn the family of the Astarte into chapter serfs, where they tend to their father or husband like any other chapter serf would. But if the fortress monastery ever got attacked, the Space Marines would have a more relatable reason to defend their fortress. Same thing with a battle barge. If void battles break out and the boarding torpedoes breach the Space Marine ship, the Space Marines have key areas of the ship that they need to protect, and if they fail, the chapter would form a vendetta against the particular threat that killed their families. Also keep in mind that although a Space Marine can retain his memories, the man he once was will dramatically change after the process of becoming a Space Marine. In a way, the boy must die in order for the superhuman warrior to rise. How that would affect the relationship between the Astartes and the family can vary greatly. Perhaps a part of the chapter's belief is that a Space Marine must learn to let go of the ones he loves in order to better serve the Imperium of Man. And leaving his family behind as he goes on crusade is a major milestone for all scouts of the chapter. Space Marines with family ties also create the possibility for conflict between the family and the chapter. For example, if the Astarte comes from nobility and their family has political power, the family might try to use the superhuman powers of the Space Marines to better their standing in Imperial society. And the chapter has to teach the new battle brother that he must overcome these human flaws and focus on his duty, ignoring the family ties. Since we're on the topic of a Space Marine family, the question of a relationship between a Sister of Battle and a Space Marine is going to inevitably come up. And unfortunately, this type of relationship would require a lot of lore bending to make it work. A Sister of Battle takes on a vow of purity, and much like a Space Marine, her purpose in life is to serve the Emperor of Mankind, and so she casts aside a normal human life to dedicate herself to the protection of the Imperial Creed. Unlike a Space Marine, however, she is not sterile, and so the temptations will always exist in her mind. In order to make this work, a Sister of Battle would need a reason to be on a Space Marine recruitment world and meet an aspirant before his trials begin. We can go through a couple scenarios where this could happen. First of all, we need to understand that there are other orders within the Adeptus Sororitas that aren't just militant orders, such as the Order Hospitaller. These are the sisters that dedicate themselves to the tending of the sick and wounded. A Space Marine chapter could have accepted aid from an Order Hospitaller faction after their recruitment world was plagued with some disease, thus creating a scenario where the two factions could meet. Another possibility is a chapter that recruits from a highly religious human stock, because the chapter itself believes in the Imperial Creed and the divinity of the Emperor of Mankind. This rare and religious Space Marine chapter could even recruit from a cardinal world, where a minor convent of the Sisters of Battle could exist, forming another scenario where a future Space Marine and a Sister of Battle could meet. The big flaw to this situation is that the sister would be breaking her vows to the Emperor of Mankind, an act of heresy in the eyes of the ecclesiarchy and pretty much all of the Imperium. The important thing to note about what we've talked about so far is that a Space Marine has a very small window of opportunity to have a child. The only way to bypass this is through the blessings of the Chaos Gods. Although there are no references in the lore to this heretical act, it can be theorized that a Chaos Space Marine dedicated to the Prince of Pleasure, Slanesh, or the Changer of Ways, Siege, could receive a blessing that allows him to father a child. There is no doubt that this Chaos baby would be twisted and warped by the powers of the Chaos Gods that even allowed such an abomination to exist, but it serves the sinister purpose of defiling the sacred biology of a Space Marine created by the Emperor of Mankind. This type of blessing should be extremely rare. Chaos warbands of the past have performed many sick and twisted actions to create more of their kind, such as the Demon Kulaba, where the Iron Warriors implanted adolescent slaves into the bodies of mutated women and injected stolen Imperial Fist gene seed into the neophytes, creating new Chaos Space Marines. If a warband had to go through this much trouble to generate more of their kind, it can be concluded that the Chaos Gods would much rather corrupt Space Marine than allow them to have children. But as one can see, through all of these scenarios, a Space Marine can have a wife, a kids, or even an extended family. How one flavors a situation is completely dependent on the story that you're trying to tell.
Those are just some of the theories that I have bouncing around in my mind. I have others, and I'm sure you do too. Comment down below, let me know what other theories, or I guess other what-if scenarios of what a Space Marine can become. Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this content, don't forget to hit the like button, share with your friends, comment down in the comment section, and if you really like us, hit us up with a super thanks or support us on Patreon. Link in the description below. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk tomorrow. This is Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation. Whoa,